Hello, friends. It's Amy Goldschlager again, welcoming you to the December edition of the New York Review of Science Fiction Reading Series. Let me just open by apologizing again for the technological glitches that we had last month. But I thought Nicole Glover was fabulous, and I hope you will go and get her books, The Conductors and the Undertakers. And I'm sorry we didn't get my awesome questions all about social justice in magic parallel universes, but that's the price we pay. Anyway, here we are in December, which is holiday season, and here at the reading series, that always means family time. And so we've got one of my very favorite creative couples, C.S.E. Cooney and Carlos Hernandez, who are going to read to us from upcoming and works in progress, and it'll be a wonderful evening. But let me also just quickly mention a couple of things. First of all, we had hoped that January would be live, but unfortunately, we recently got the news that the owner of the Brooklyn Common has actually sold the ground floor of the building and to a publishing company who intend to convert it into an office. So at the present time, we are looking for new digs. So in the meantime, we will continue to be virtual and to bring you the very best of readers from all around the world. And I hope that we will have news both about a new location, but at least prior to that, information about our upcoming readers for January and in the months beyond. I hope that, speaking of holidays, that everybody who celebrated Hanukkah has a really good one. I had to stick my menorah in the freezer to get all the wax off. And I hope that everybody who celebrates the variety of holidays upcoming, Kwanzaa, Yule, and Christmas, and everything else that I've forgotten, will continue to be wonderful for everyone. And since you are not here to listen to me babble, except for later when there will be a Q&A. Oh, and actually, let me just mention, we will be having a Q&A afterwards. I prepared some questions for Carlos and Claire, but if you have your own questions, please put them in the public chat. And Barbara Krasnoff, who this month is our audience wrangler, will feed them to me. And we will ask those. So now's the time. Let me also just tender my thanks to the producer of this series, Jim Freund, and remind all of you that the series is not free. Jim will be putting up the link to his Patreon, and I hope that you will all consider giving a tip to help support the software that allows us to stream to you all, and also will ideally help defray costs when we go live again and in person, which we are hoping to do soon. Okay, on to the main event. Our first reader tonight is going to be Carlos Hernandez. He wrote the critically acclaimed short story collection, The Assimilated Cupid's Guide to Quantum Santeria, the novel Sal and Gabby Break the Universe, which won the 2020 Pura Belpré Award, and its sequel, Sal and Gabby Fix the Universe. And I'm sure we all know that there's a deal to bring Sal and Gabby to the screen, and I really, really hope that that happens. But in the meantime, option, free money, awesome. Carlos has also written dozens of short stories, poems, and works of drama, usually in the SFF mode. Most recently, oh gosh, I'm going to mispronounce this. Hernandez is one of the authors in the Rick is it Riordan? I hope I've got it right this time.
Yeah.
Because the last reading I went to, there was a contest, and I think in my head it's always been Riordan, which I know is wrong. Rick Riordan presents anthology, The Cursed Carnival and Other Calamities, or maybe it's The Cursed Carnival, because I always like that better. Yeah. Currently, he and his wife, author C.S.E. Cooney, are completing work on their GM-less role-playing game, Negocios Infernales, which will be published by Outland Entertainment. You can find Carlos on Twitter at Write, that's W-R-I-T-E, Teach Play. Carlos Hernandez.
Hello, everybody.
And also Claire.
Oh yeah, Claire is right. They're showing you our little. This is the back side of the card for our game, Negocios en Finales. It comes with a deck of cards, and I'll just mention quickly that tomorrow we have a charity event that we're running through Pat Rothfuss's World Builders charity. We're running an Infernal Salon that's going to use those cards to inspire a whole bunch of writers. We have people like Martha Wells, and I mean, just like a ton of people to basically raise money for World Builders. So you're having fun tonight. You like this kind of show? Come tomorrow as well. Thank you so much, New York Review of Science Fiction, one of the absolute institutions here at New York City in terms of science fiction. It is always such a pleasure to come and read, and I hope all of you will continue to support Amy and Jim and Barbara and the whole gang so that we can keep this reading series going. Tonight, I'm going to read you two things, one thing very short and one thing not so short. Both of them not yet published. One of them is almost published, though. So the first thing I'm going to read you is a short poem. It's called On the Mobius, and it's going to be published in On the Deadlands, which is a new magazine that came out just really, I think, like 6 months ago. It was just crowdfunded. Sonia Tafe is the poetry editor there. And I wrote a pantoum that's going to come out in the very next issue of it. And so it's very sort of like rhythmic. And if you don't know what a pantoum is, it's a highly, highly repetitious poem where two of the lines from the previous stanza get teleported into the new stanza. I think it's lines 2 and 4 move into 1 and 3, and it loops around and stuff like that. They don't have to be quite as rhythmic as I've made this one, but it's rhythmic. So I hope you enjoy this poem on the Mobius. I won't resist. I know I can't. I'm statue still. I'm scentless. Take a whiff. There's nothing left of mind or fear or promises. I'm statue still, of scent bereft. I'm sea glass tumbled smooth by salt. I don't mind fear. It promises to come and go and go and come and go. I'm sea glass, yes, still new, still sharp. I hate my edge. I need more time to come and go and go and come and go on the Mobius, the dead and living ride. I hate my edge. There was a time I loved to kill and eat. But on the Mobius, the dead and living ride, I feast upon myself in time and love it. Love to kill and eat the molecules over which I ruled. I feast upon myself, for time has taken all my sovereignty. All those molecules over which I ruled, they severed all their bonds with me. And all my former sovereignty, I wish that none of it remained. Sever all your bonds with me. I scream to nothing voicelessly. I wish that none of me remained. Wherefore this helpless qualia? I scream, and nothing voicelessly replies, its voice a cavern's hush. Wherefore this helpless qualia? An echo? No, the wish for one. I am become a cavern's hush. I won't resist. I know I can't. An echo of myself? I wish. Take a whiff. There's too much left. That's on the Mobius, everyone. Just to give us a little bit of a warm-up, to me, it's like one of the closest things to a song or song lyrics that I've written in a long time. So that's our little taste to get us warmed up today. Now, what I'm going to do, though, is read you something that has no promise of being published because I haven't sold it anywhere or anything, but it is, by intention anyway, my next novel. It's called Fig. That's Thig, Fig. And the reason it's called Fig is because rats are thigmophilic. I don't actually have the ability to write in the chat. So if I could, I would write thigmophilic in the chat so you could Google it quickly. But thigmophilia, it means that you are touch loving. And what that means in terms of rats, for instance, is that rats use their whole bodies to map their worlds. I mean, their eyesight, not so great. They do have good senses of smell, but that only get you so far. Really what they do is they map their worlds in 1,080 degrees, basically by rubbing up against it and getting used to the passageways and the turns. And this is another reason why rats, they don't like to change their patterns. They're neophobic because once they get their map, they want to use the map that they have because that's a map that they can trust. So rats are thigmophilic. And what I did in my fantastical way of thinking about these things was think, all right, so rats already love to rub up against each other and around their world and whatever. What if we could turn that love of rubbing up against things into its own language? So I want you to just know from the outset that Thig is one of the languages that rats speak. The other one, I mean, it comes out in what I'm going to be reading, but the other one is Spanglish, or I should say more like English. You know what? It'll make sense when I read it. You'll actually get this part. So this reading has two epigraphs at the front, and one is from Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. It goes, "When you've lived in a cage, you can't bear not to run, even if what you're running toward is an illusion." And the second epigraph is from the unstoppable Ursula Le Guin. "People who deny the existence of dragons are often eaten by dragons from within." All right, folks. This is Thig. It's broken into parts, but each part has several subsections and they all have different titles to them. So part one is what we're going to be hearing from today, but there are going to be several subtitles. The first subtitle is "Fear is the Food of Heroes." With a rat tucked into each armpit, Consuelo Matanunca ran as fast as he could toward Times Square. He had to. Only he knew about the dragon that was racing through the New York City subway system. Only he knew that it was heading straight for the Neil Simon Theater and that it was going to eat the entire cast of the hit Broadway musical Cats. Don't say it. No, not even the cast of Cats deserves to be devoured by dragons. For shame. Look, his beloved Tia Alegria was one of the actors in the show, and no way was he going to allow her to be eaten. That dragon had already swallowed too many members of his family that night. Now, you might think a 10-year-old running at night on a Manhattan sidewalk might attract some attention from folks. Furthermore, Consuelo was wearing a black, spongy, sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit. It squished sewer juice onto the sidewalk with every stride. The only part of his bodysuit that wasn't black and spongy and sewagey was his faceplate. But that thing was impenetrable one-way glass. When you look at someone's face and get a mirror instead, it's a little disturbing, right? And don't forget, he had two darling rats in his armpits. Some humans would find that the most disturbing thing of all. So maybe you'd expect people to be screaming and pointing at him and jumping out of the way. Maybe you'd expect someone to call the cops. But nah. This is NYC, baby. New Yorkers are the world's greatest masters of mind your beeswax. Consuelo ran through the crowd at top speed in his unusual attire, but the crowd didn't even part to make way for him. In the way of New Yorkers, everyone just kind of schmooved around each other, not making eye contact, not saying excuse me. Those New Yorkers that schmooved around Consuelo smelled a lot more sewery than they had just a second ago, but none of their noses even twitched. New Yorkers are way, way, way too cool to let their noses twitch. It's like they all went to the same runway model school or something. Consuelo, right now, was the opposite of a runway model. He couldn't care less how he looked. All he cared about was defeating the dragon, saving his Tia, and then searching for the rest of his family. He was breathing hard and sweating harder. He looked at the world with hard eyes, and he squeezed his hands into fists, pumping them hard as he ran. But it was his jackhammer heart that worked hardest of all, and not just because he was getting the cardio workout of a lifetime. His Thig was full of fear. To fight that fear, Consuelo said, out loud, "Today, I will slay a dragon. Heroes slay dragons. And if I am afraid, so what? Fear is the food of heroes. We love the way Consuelo talks. He is the sincerest human we have ever known. When you look up the word irony in the dictionary, there's a picture of Consuelo, and the caption beneath it reads, the opposite of this kid. The point is, those words gave Consuelo the motivation to speed up, which seemed impossible. He was already booking it so hard, but now he was booking even bookier. Nothing on Broadway was moving as fast as he was. Not people, not animals, not even cars. But then again, this is New York. Cars get passed by fire hydrants here. Time, Consuelo said, between breaths. His sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit's AI/personal assistant replied, 8:24 p.m. The AI's name was Boca Grande, which is a very good name for a very bossy AI. There is a 4-minute slowdown ahead caused by clueless tourists and slack-jawed gawkers. You are still on the fastest route. Faster, Consuelo said, out loud. Encouragement, a promise, and an unbreakable vow, all rolled into one. It was so earnest and powerful a statement, it thigged through his entire body like an electric tidal wave. The rats in his pits shook like struck bells, and their little cutie patootie rat brains shorted out for 6 full human heartbeats. New section. Eugenia lives. Consuelo had started running as soon as he had finished his first battle with the dragon. He had popped out of the old City Hall subway stop at 8:13 p.m. That's near the bottom of Manhattan. And now he was just passing 21st Street at 8:24 p.m. That meant he was running about a 5.5-minute mile. For a young human, that is fast. But by rat standards, Consuelo Matanunca was a god. He had been running for 11 minutes straight. Any rat that tried that would pop like a fat rat firecracker in under 30 seconds. And still, all Consuelo wanted, we knew we could thig it, was to go faster. This is why we love him, by the way, why we love the whole thigging Matanunca family. They're champions. Every one of them, and friends to all rat kind. The least we could do was to help the Matanuncas in their hour of need. That is why we had sent 2 of our representatives, the rats in Consuelo's armpits, to help. Those 2 rats reminded Consuelo constantly, with all the electric earnestness with which a rat can thig, that there was still hope. Eugenia, said the rat in his left armpit out loud in Spanish. That rat was named Rabioso. Lives, said the rat in his right armpit out loud in English. Her name was La Plaga. They would have said more encouraging words, except that they couldn't. Literally, the only word in human Rabioso knew how to say was Eugenia. He was that word's voice. The rat who had been entrusted to speak Eugenia's name whenever we needed to speak human out loud. La Plaga was the voice of the word live, but she was so smart. She could say live with a short I and live with a long I. And she could say living and lived and lives. Amazing. Oh, but even geniuses have their limits. One time, when La Plaga tried to say enliven, she weed herself and fell into a coma for 3 days. And she definitely couldn't say will live, because will is a whole different word. And Moco Verde was the only rat in New York City who could say the word will out loud. And he wasn't there, because Consuelo didn't have 3 armpits. But what our human vocabularies lacked in breadth, they make up for in passion. Rabioso and La Plaga repeated over and over with the unstoppable power of an old-timey train, Eugenia lives, Eugenia lives, Eugenia lives! And while they said those words out loud, they thigged encouragement and admiration with their whole bodies shaking like joy buzzers in Consuelo's pits. Humans often find having wiggling rats in their armpits somewhat ticklish, but Consuelo was focused like a Spartan on his mission, and everyone knows Spartans are not ticklish. New section. Schnauzers do not like the taste of sewers. Now you know. Consuelo found hauling his human hiney north on Broadway on this fine summer Saturday night extremely difficult. As we said, the streets were packed with people. In Manhattan, they always are. Why? Because apartments in New York City are small. How small? We're so glad you asked. You can stand in your kitchen and change a light bulb in your bedroom. They have to install the bathtubs vertically. When you fart, your neighbor's paintings shake. That's why we New Yorkers have always, since time immemorial, used any excuse in the world to go outside. Ooh, sorry, I'm just gonna make sure my camera's okay here. Smacking things around here. All right. But now, good people, once COVID had been well and truly defeated, this is science fiction, it's set in the future, may that day come soon. But once COVID had been well and truly defeated, nothing could convince a Manhattanite to stay indoors. They absolutely thronged the streets and parks and open spaces of New York, making every street corner a clot of human bodies, every park a human popcorn popper of activity, every sidewalk a sudden parade, a jubilant cavalcade, celebrating nothing more than the ability to cavalcade jubilantly. Restaurant tables overflowed onto the sidewalks. Cars could hardly move. There were so many people always crossing in the crosswalks. Dogs on leashes tried to smell every one of the hundreds and hundreds of butts that whizzed by them. At this point in human history, the dogs of Manhattan were the happiest dogs in the whole world. So many butts. So many butts. Consuelo loved dogs, but right now, dogs were his enemies because, you see, when certain dogs see someone running, they go into chase mode. Like, say, the miniature Schnauzer Consuelo passed on the corner of Broadway and 25th at 8:27 p.m. The elderly man walking it didn't have it on a leash because, well, there was no good reason. Humans, like rats, can be jerks. Leash your dogs, jerks! And so, its bark, a song of murder. The Schnauzer charged Consuelo and bit him on his right ankle. Poor dog. Poor pupper. When it sank its fangs into the sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit, it instantly learned several pieces of very bad news. 1. The sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit was basically the unholy child of Black Marshmallows and the Michelin Man. Its bite had no effect. Its teeth just sank into the black marshmallowy, Michelin manly softness of the suit and were trapped there, like dinosaurs drowning in a tar pit. 2. The sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit did not taste like marshmallows or anything you would find at a Michelin star restaurant. It tasted like a sewer. 3. Schnauzers do not like the taste of sewer. This last fact surprised us. Dogs eat trash all the time. They drink from toilets. And may the rat god bless you if you've had to keep your dog from treating your cat's litter box as an all-you-can-eat buffet. We rats may live in sewers, but friends, we have standards. Before today, we would have said dogs have no standards. But, apparently, Schnauzers draw the line at sewer-proof hazmat bodysuits that have been marinated in sewer juice and bruleed by the summer heat until they taste like sponge cake recovered from a porta potty. Ah, sad little Schnauzer. Bit off a little more than you could chew, did you? Consuelo was so focused on running that he hadn't even noticed that a small dog had bitten his right ankle, could not let go, and was presently learning the meaning of the word regret. The Schnauzer could have kept biting him for 100 years and Consuelo would not have felt a thing. So protective is the sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit. Those things are designed to protect against sewer alligator bites, people. No, Consuelo only noticed the hapless half-hound when it whined. New section. You do not have to put rats in your armpits in order to speak Thig. I mean, you can if you want to, and the rats will certainly enjoy it, but it's not strictly required. Rabioso and La Plaga didn't need to be touching Consuelo's skin when he was wearing a sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit in order to thig with him. It was specifically designed to allow humans and rats to thig with each other without coming into bodily contact. Thig is a language without sound. It transmits meaning by touch, sensation, feeling. But since humans don't generally like to have a lot of exposed flesh when they're down in the sewers, the Matanuncas designed a protective suit, patent pending, that provided both one, unmatched bodily protection, and two, thigmiotic somatic sensation. Or, to put it simply, tickle Consuelo when he's wearing his sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit, and he will laugh. But prick him, and he will not bleed. Yes, rats read Shakespeare. Now you know. Manhattan is noisy, so Consuelo didn't hear the dog who was ankle biting him whimper, so much as he felt sorrow and remorse and, oh no, what is this terrible taste in my mouth? Digging up his leg and spreading all the way up to the thinking parts of his body, namely his stomach and his brain. Consuelo stopped running on the corner of Broadway and 29th. What was that? There's a schnauzer attached to your ankle, said Boca Grande in its snottiest robot voice. Why didn't you tell me? Because, sniffed Boca Grande, even though it was an AI and had no nose. It posed no threat to us. It was too small and light to slow us down, and frankly, it needed to learn a lesson about not biting people's ankles. Please, Boca Grande, stop trying to teach everyone harsh lessons all the time. But teaching harsh lessons is my love language, said Boca Grande. But it knew it was one busted AI and went quiet. Consuelo knelt and twisted around so he could see the dog. You poor thing, he said, and his empathy washed through Rabioso and La Plaga like mercy from heaven. Will you let me help you let go? Consuelo put his fingers on the doggo's jaws. The dog growled, but it wasn't a threatening growl. The fig that went along with the growl was a complex emotion. It meant something like, sorry, human, but my idiot canine instincts are forcing me to growl right now, even though there's nothing more in the world I would rather do than remove my mouth from your disgusting ankle and run away as fast as I can. Please help me. Oh, and apologies in advance if I nip you while you are trying to help again. Idiot canine instincts. Sincerely, one thoroughly rueful Doge. I understand, said Consuelo. We could thig the growing gentleness swelling inside of him, even before the dog could. Consuelo was preparing to release a great deal of thig in one massive rush of communication. He let go of the dog's jaws and pressed the pup's midsection with both hands. Then, like 1,000 doves being released at a wedding, Consuelo thigged, I love you, to the schnauzer. Rabioso and La Plaga felt like they died and went to heaven, which, by the way, is exactly what it feels like to spend all night in a dumpster in Little Italy. They were too thigged out to remember anything else from that moment. They just lay curled in Consuelo's armpits and twitched happily and squeaked blissfully. But the rats, who were on the scene at 29th and Broadway, peering from garbage cans and sewer grates, reported that the schnauzer immediately removed its mouth from Consuelo's ankle and began politely coughing. It never took its eyes off of Consuelo after that moment, but not because it was scared. No, quite the opposite. The schnauzer was smitten. It had never felt a rush of love as complete as what Consuelo had just given it. After that moment, that schnauzer would have followed Consuelo anywhere. It would do anything for him. Even after Consuelo let the pupper go, it shot invisible heart-tipped arrows at Consuelo with its eyes. That's the power of Thig, people. That dog would love Consuelo for the rest of its life. And I think I will stop there. Thank you very much, everybody. So grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Muted again. Oh, let's see. Now I'm unmuted. Okay. Thank you so much, Carlos. We've been having a little conversation on the chat about our experiences with rats. And as I know I mentioned to you in a previous reading, I have a complicated relationship with the Norway rat, who I assume is the variety mentioned because those are the fat and intelligent and creepy rats that are all over New York City, and I always am terribly afraid they're going to run over my foot. And also the same ones that I had in my psych class in college, and despite, as I know I told you, naming my rat Nicodemus after one of the rats in Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim was the second dumbest rat in the class. I mean, what good is it if you are good in psychology if your rat is not also smart with you? Very, 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 very frustrating. Anyway, nobody wants to hear of my troubles. What they want is to hear the next fabulous reader who I'm also excited for you all to listen to because let's face it, she's also a professional audiobook narrator and everything she reads is delightful. Although, to be honest with you, Carlos, your delivery is also fantastic. Only your wife could be a good could follow you because it's hard to follow after that. Anyway, C.S.E. Cooney is the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning Bone Swan Stories. And the other one that's not even in this list is she did this great pandemic collection that I absolutely loved called The Witch of the Almond Tree and Other Stories. Did I get the title right, Claire? Yeah.
The Witch in the Almond Tree and Other
of the Almond Stories, which is also really good. And I advise you all to find out either the text version or the audiobook version, but you should get the audiobook version. In 2022, her novel Saint Death's Daughter debuts with Solaris, as well as her collection Darkbreakers, all stories taking place in the world of Desdemona and the Deep. Her novella, which was published by Tor.com. And the collection is forthcoming from Mythic Delirium, who, as I'm sure you know, has made several appearances at NYRSF. Mike Allen is a wonderful friend of the series. Claire's short novel, The Twice Drowned Saint, appears in Mythic Delirium's A Sinister Quartet and made the 2020 Locus recommended reading list for Best First Novel, which reminds me I really have to put in my votes for this year. That's my problem. Her 2021 short work includes stories in Uncanny Magazine and Mermaids Monthly, both co-written with husband Carlos Hernandez, and both inspired by story prompts from Negocios Infernales, a TTRPG designed by Cooney and Hernandez, forthcoming from Outland Entertainment. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that later because it really is awesome. Find her online as csecooney.com, at csecooney on Twitter and IG, and facebook.com/cscooney. Claire Cooney.
Hi. Thank you so much for watching tonight and tuning in. I guess I have a couple things because I do have two books coming out next year. I did selections from both of them. They'll run just a couple minutes over 25 minutes. And there had been some mention of perhaps singing. I did find in my files my Krampus Santa Baby parody called Krampus Baby, but maybe we'll save that for later if there's time. They'd asked for music and I was like, well, that's what I have. I didn't really rehearse it, but I think it's funny anyway. I think I'll start with Darkbreakers. The only thing that I have time to read in its entirety is the last short story in Darkbreakers, because mostly Darkbreakers is big novellas and novelettes collected all together. The first two novellas, The Breaker Queen and The Two Paupers, are about the length of Desdemona and the Deep. So they're basically almost novels, but not quite. And then I wrote a new novella and a new novelette. But the only short story in this collection is called Sisera to the Moon. I guess what you have to know is this: there are three worlds in one, And there's the world of the goblins, which is the Bone Kingdom, Bana, the Bone Kingdom. Then there's the world of the gentry, which are like fairies, and that's called sometimes the Volwoad or the Veil Between Worlds. And then there's the human world Eighth, which kind of sounds like Earth. So when they talk about Eighth, they're talking about human things that we would know. And it, like the Bana, the Bone Kingdom, the goblins always exist in a perpetual night, and in the Volwoad with the gentry, it's always twilight. And the humans just have normal like cycles because they're the top world, and then there's the world beneath. Then there's the world beneath the world beneath. And I guess that you just kind of have to have that kind of in your bones to intuit this story the best. C.S.E. to the moon. Here's the illustration for it. It's very pretty. This collection is going to be published in February of next year. So just a couple months. And you can pre-order it on mythicdelirium.com. Chaz, said C.S.E., the night hag, queen of the Volwoad, 12th daughter of Errol Lord Kalos Gonsaros, king of kobolds and all the goblin kin, to her darling wife as they lay in bed one night. Correction, it was not night. It was evening. In the Volwoad, it was always evening and never night. But even without a proper night, or morning for that matter, a bed was still a beautiful thing, an awfully convenient location at any hour of the gloaming. If the Volwoad had hours, or indeed any measurement of time, which it didn't. In a bed, one could lounge about, or loll around, or read, or make love to all one's lovers, or eat fat black grapes off of one's wife's bejeweled belly, and then, best of all, fall asleep upon her breast, and dream and dream and dream the Volwoad into being. C.S.E. was very fond of both her bed and her wife, but there was one dream that she, greatest of dreamers, the visionary of the Veil Between Worlds, could not make manifest in her own home, which was, in a word, preposterous. It could not stand. Chaz, C.S.E. said again, more insistently. Absently turning a page of her magazine, Chaz replied, "Yes, love." Alas, that their third spouse, Albin Idris, was off on a quest of its own, somewhere upworld on Eighth, leaving its two wives to their own devices at Darkbreakers. Albin's infrequent truancies always made Chaz somewhat vague and inattentive, made C.S.E. restless and itchy. Albin was their anchor, their safe harbor, their gentling influence. Without its presence, C.S.E. tended to start climbing walls and hanging from ceilings, literally, and Chaz took to lying about and listlessly thumbing through her latest stack of art magazines. C.S.E. wrinkled her nose at the current magazine. To her exquisitely sensitive goblin girl nostrils, it smelled too much like humans. The stale, sticky, toilety parts of humans. The Volwoad didn't do toilets, but C.S.E. had seen one once. The big public toilet of Larissa Central Station up on 8th. She recalled a vast, cave-like building where steel-stinking trains were constantly roaring in and out of an underground network like great rail-bound worms, only not as fabulous as worms, but with cushier seats and windows for staring out of onto the weird landscape of 8th. C.S.E. had been to that station only once, for nefarious purposes that she will not admit to even in the third person. And while she had enjoyed her train ride more than she cared to admit, she did not like the stenchful toilets. Being a goblin girl, with a goblin girl's anatomy, C.S.E. had no need for commodes. Chaz, when Chaz was human, might have used a few, but Chaz was no longer human. Chaz, like C.S.E., was gentry queen of the Volwoad, the Veil Between Worlds. A gentry queen had almighty powers, the least of which was the ability to turn shit into gold, or roses, or nightmares, or whatever. So like she'd said already, the Volwoad didn't do toilets. It did, however, do fumets. Fumets existed for highly entertaining activities like the wild hunt. You can't hunt unicorns or dragons, or Gladysants, or any of that without glittering scat to follow. Everybody knew that. Chaz, pay attention to me. Stop making out with the... Sisira's eyes crossed, trying to read the magazine upside down. The Seafall aesthetic, like it is more gorgeous than I am. We both know that that is a lie. Am I not your beloved? Am I not your oath-sworn wife? Am I not your queen? She put on her darkest, most resoundifying goblin-y voice for that last bit. Here, Queen Chaz, the Incarnadine, put the magazine down, but not all the way down, and smiled over the top edge. You are my goddess. How may I serve you? Seeing the tender glow light Chaz's round blue eyes, Sisira melted into an Icarus puddle of goblin goo. Her hair legs got all somnolent and sexy. She blinked a slow cat blink and manifested in place of Chaz's current sartorial attire, a revealing nightgown of scarlet and gold with some very interesting mesh bits and slits. Oh, Chaz glanced down at her newly garbed self. Now the magazine went all the way away, beyond the pillow even, to Sisira's eminent satisfaction. She couldn't wish mortal things away like that hell-spawned magazine, alas. Chaz had to actually, put them down. Is this what you're after, Sisira? She gestured to her delectable self. No, Sisira said, pleased at her success. Or, well, yes, but not just yet. I want you, Chaz. She climbed atop her wife and sat upon her ribcage cross-legged. To tell me all about... She bent to bring her dwayberry dark lips right up close to Chaz's scarlet scimitar smile. The moon! Chaz's head scrunched down into the pillow. I beg your pardon? I want to know all about the moon! Sisira shouted, sitting upright and bouncing a little. Chaz didn't even oof. Sisira weighed practically nothing. Goblin girls were made of cobwebs and chitin and a kind of creepy-crawly sensation. And Chaz was a fine, strapping woman, very healthy, with flesh and blood and all that sort of thing. Sort of. That was how she dreamed herself, anyway. Chaz used to be mortal, the way Albin Idris used to be a clay statue, the way she, Sisira, used to be a full-blown, full-time goblin, no question. But now they were all three of them gentry, transformed from whatever they used to be, that they might co-rule the Volwoad together and dream it into being. Sometimes Sisira forgot this and acted too goblin-y for her people's liking. Sometimes Albin Idris stood too still, mesmerizing whatever gentry happened to glance in its direction. And sometimes Chaz read stupid human magazines instead of paying attention to her beautiful wife. Mostly they all balanced each other nicely, which was why there were three of them reigning over the Volwoad and its gentry denizens instead of just Sisira lording over all, which had been admittedly a childhood ambition of hers. It was an ambition that she'd once in her youngishness fomented a marvelous rebellion in order to achieve. Well, that had failed. And she'd got clapped in iron for it. Blah. And she'd learned her lesson. And then she met Chazzy, and here they all were. Ah, youth. Enough twilight had passed since they were first seated with the scion horn of the antler crown and took the throne together that Chaz didn't even smell mortal anymore. Praise the horns. That had happened, what was it now, 60 years or so ago, as mortals reckoned time? Chaz and Albin Idris were better at calculating stupid things like time. Sisira really couldn't care less, except that they both did. Only Chaz's antler crown still retained a whiff of mortality, with its tines of red iron, stained with the last drops of her heart's blood as they had pierced their way out of her skull. But Chaz was not mortal. Not anymore. She was entirely gentry, just like Sisira liked it. Chaz would last longer that way. She'd last forever if Sisira had any say about it, which she did. Sisira was still waiting for Chaz to answer her question. Chaz was taking so long. Chaz was a darling, but she did mull. C.S.E. considered grasping Chaz's antler crown in both her fists and shaking it a little, making Chaz jiggle all over in all the right ways. But no, Chaz was opening her mouth. She was talking. I can tell you about the moon if you really want me to, C.S.E., but you aren't going to find it very interesting. Why not? C.S.E. demanded with instant umbrage. All right. So perhaps she had forgotten, just for a moment, what it was exactly she had asked Chaz in the first place. Who could blame her when Chaz had taken so totally and entirely too long, ages, eons, to answer? But now that C.S.E. remembered, you bet she found it interesting. Very. What makes you think I won't like it? I think I will love it. It is the moon. We don't have one in the Valwode. The one time I tried to dream one up, a 3-petaled flower bloomed in the sky, 1 petal silver, 1 petal white, 1 petal black, and now it will not go away, which is most vexatious. I have never even seen the moon for myself. That one time when the 3 of us snuck up into 8th, Chazzy, and we went on that adventuresome train ride, I looked for the moon through the window all night long, but there wasn't one to be had for love or dreaming because you said it was the wrong time of the month or the wrong side of the world or something, and I just couldn't wish a moon into the sky when there was none to be had. Not that you listened to me, Chaz muttered. You tried anyway. C.S.E. snorted. Of course I didn't listen, but my powers didn't work so well on 8th that time. She tucked her pointy chin and grumbled, I bet Nyx the Nightwalker could have made the moon bloom, here in the Valwode or up on 8th, whatever the time of month. She was a gentry queen of dread repute, fell and perilous, and totally swole, and thousands of years old, love, Chaz put in. You are just a spiderling yet. You have time to grow stronger. But Chaz, I want the moon now. I want to bring it here to the Valwode. Don't you think we ought to have a moon? Moons are for mortals, Chaz said firmly. Mortals have such little lives. They get to have the night sky and all its objects. It's their only infinity. It's not fair. Is it not enough, C.S.E.? Chaz interrupted her. To be the moon? You who shine so brightly, all the Valwode is lit by you. You who make the tides crash and the crickets sing. The Valwode doesn't have any crickets. All right, pixies then. You make the pixies sing. They'd better, C.S.E. said darkly. Chaz laughed from way down below on the bed. C.S.E. glanced around in surprise. In her dudgeon, she'd somehow managed to somersault herself into the air and attach herself to the ceiling by the hair legs. Now she loosed herself and drifted back down to the bed like a bit of gossamer on a breeze to curl up close to her wife again. Chaz made room for her by knocking the rest of the magazines to the floor. C.S.E. purred in contentment, but not for long. Why? She asked plaintively, popping back up. Why, Chazzy? Why can't I make the moon? Because, Chaz sighed, the moon is an ontological reality, not a phenomenological construct. It cannot therefore exist in the Valwode, where our world's very existence depends on which way we dream it. C.S.E. waited. It's just a big dusty rock, C.S.E., a ball of pitted asphalt. No atmosphere, moonquakes, cold lava, and ice. A human can't live up there. I mean, other than the fact that it's hundreds of thousands of miles away, with no easy way to get there, and no air to breathe, there's something else called space radiation, which kills you slowly if everything else doesn't do you in first. It's just not gentry, C.S.E. The Valwode doesn't need the moon. We are a world made of moonlight. C.S.E. stroked her wife's spine gently. The poisoned tips of her talons tickled but did not prick. You need it, she said softly. Chaz groaned and buried her face in her arms. You need the moon, C.S.E. accused her, cheerfully, viciously, triumphantly. You miss it. You pine for it. You can't hide something like that from me. Not for more than half a century, as you former mortal types reckon time, anyway. I will always be able to tell these things by and by. Mark me. Chaz made a noise like, that C.S.E. interpreted correctly as, yes, my queen, my goddess, you know me so well. How did I ever live all the whole mortal sum of my years without your wiliness, your rapier insight, your beauty, and your unbearable perspicacity? That does it, Sasira clapped her hands together. Say no more, my Chazzy. I know what I'm going to get you and Albin Idris for our next anniversary gift. I am going to give you the moon. Sasira! Chaz bellowed, aggravated, her antler crown casting red thorn shadows across the glowing walls. You can't just pluck. It's not like it's a mortal thing, okay? You know what? Fine. You're right. I miss the moon. Yes, of course I do, but I'll get over it. I have thousands of years to get over it. You don't have to get over it, Sasira said, reasonably. Albin Idris had taught her how to sound reasonable. Albin Idris always sounded reasonable. It was its best trick. We can go up to 8th and visit the moon right now. Then I will figure out how to call it down for you or get you up there to visit it instead. After all, what is space radiation and the vacuous void to the gentry queens? She demanded at her grandest. Now, advise me, my wife, to whom do I speak about this? Who are the human people in charge of the moon? Chaz, playing along, pretended to think a moment. Well, the AEC, I suppose. The AEC? The Aerospace Exploration Cooperative. It's an international collaboration between the humans, different countries' space agencies. Sasira's hair legs rose up and rubbed against each other like mating snakes. Hairy ones. Oh, Chazzy, my Chaz, my most Chazmerific of Chazes, witness me. This AEC of yours is about to get some interworldly collaboration from the Valwode. But Chaz was still not taking her seriously. The poor, benighted, moon-besotted, once mortal darling. Sussa, really, are you just going to stroll upworld, march into the AEC's Mission Control Center with your robe of cobwebs and your semi-sentient hair legs and your big black antler crown and all, and demand gentry representation on board their next rocket ship? Sasira shrugged. Sure, maybe. Yes, or maybe, and her black purple eyes glinted. I'll just steal you a rocket ship. Then we can go up there together, you and me and Albin Idris. Am I not a perfect genius, the cleverest and slyest and subtlest sovereign of this, our great triumvirate? Would we not all love a short vacation on the moon? It's practically a business trip. It will give us a great lot of new things to dream on, all for the sake of the Valwode. Chaz said, extremely fondly. You know what you are, Sasira? You're a dreamboat. I am the dreamer of the Valwode, Sasira said majestically. And, she promised, I'm going to dream us up a boat to the moon. And that's Sasira to the moon. And I actually feel that was probably quite enough reading. So I will not read from Saint Death's Daughter today because I don't think we have time. But you should pre-order it anyway and trust me that it's fabulous. Radio silence. Oh,
No. We're all back. And that was just lovely, Claire. I'm glad because I hadn't heard that one before and I have to go and read it because I actually have, 2 different copies of the book. So there's no excuse.
Oh, an excuse.
Well, I don't have an excuse. Anyway. I just want to remind the audience, as Barbara has so kindly done so, that we are going to segue to the Q&A, and I will have some questions prepared. In fact, I do have some questions prepared, but after that, if you have things you'd like to say to Claire and Carlos, you should get them ready. I will also say that because I was the right age, I actually liked the musical Cats. So the Broadway one. I mean, we won't really speak of the movie because that's a whole other thing. Anyhow, so I was thinking about when I was thinking about the work that the two of you do, and really it's interesting because you two really do share certain kinds of common themes, and your creative collaboration in the way that you work together is pretty strong. And I just thought that was interesting. And one of the things that I was thinking about is both of you, I mean, and this is not surprising because you're writers, are interested in wordplay. Although I feel like you employ it differently. And that, say, with Claire's work, I feel like I need to have a dictionary next to me because my vocabulary is pretty good. But there are lots of words, and certainly in Saint Death's Daughter, you will need a dictionary full of some very interesting words, because there's stuff in there that I know I never heard. It's a little bit like when I read Candide in French class and learned all kinds of really interesting French vocabulary, like disembowel and stuff like that. And then Carlos, I feel like, with you, I certainly learn lots of Spanglish and Cuban Spanish, and that you also have a tendency to take English words and repurpose them in the way that you desire. So I would love it if you'd both speak on the importance of wordplay in your work, both separately and together, and how that feeds your creative process.
Cool. You want to start, Claire?
Yeah, I was going to say that for Saint Death's Daughter, I certainly had to use the dictionary a lot to write it, and then I made up a bunch of words too, so you won't be able to find them in a dictionary. And sometimes when I read it, I have to go back to the dictionary because I forgot the word, but I'm like, oh, I can get it in context a little bit. But I just love them. And Carlos and I sometimes daydream about going on a domestic date in which we take all our dictionaries of obscure words and just read them for several hours together. So that's like our idea of a good time. And I will say that watching Carlos write the Sal and Gabby books, and now Fig, I learned so much, especially about comic writing, but also, well, gosh, about emotional nuance. And also one of my favorite things he does is take either phrases or nouns and he verbifies them. So like, he or adverbifies them. So
Yeah.
he tipped his hat Alfred Hitchcockily is something he might do. Or she just Maltese falconed me. Like he'll do things like that. And I'm just like, it reminds me anew all the time what language can do. And so I really I'm on my mettle. I feel he makes language so robust and muscular and full of ebullience and spirit. And I just want to be like that when I grow up. So I really have my writing game has skyrocketed since I met him, and certainly since I started living with him, and even more since I started collaborating with him.
Well, it's definitely mutual, because one of the things that I remember as a kid reading fantasy was loving to learn all the words that I learned, because language is the closest thing we have to actual magic. Language is the thing that we use to conceptualize ideas that don't exist before we then try to actualize them. But, the ideas like dream it, then do it. What we really mean is dream it, say it, make a plan for it, use your tools to do it, and then try and do it 20 times wrong. And then on the 21st iteration, you get a thing. But all of that happens because of language. So language is our magic. It's just slower than abracadabra. You can't say abracadabra and the thing goes. There are many steps in between, but the first step is the one that makes all the other ones possible. And that's what Claire's work does. Claire, as an adult, as a person who's been reading for a long time, has a PhD, read the dictionary for fun, a la Malcolm X, Claire teaches me words, and also just the love of the magical words. So Ostrobogulus is one of the words that she uses as a name for one of the Stones characters in the Stones lineage of that family tree. But it's such a hilarious, great word, And so there's so much joy in just finding a weird, perfect, or even just imperfectly wild word to insert there. And I think, it's a celebration of language along with everything else that's going on, all of her writing is, but especially Saint Death's Daughter.
Optionplooper was also one. Ostrobogulus is another one. Optionplooper is a word that it's a German word that means the person, the kind of the mooch who'll come over and eat your food and never pay for his part of the restaurant, and it's just sort of you can't really get rid of them. But Optionplooper, Stones, is the name of one of the a footnote character, but it made me very happy.
I mean, isn't that a great word though? It's just it sounds like it would be perfect for a polka, right? Optionplooper, go home right now. Please go home right now. You know what I mean? It's perfect, and it's just imagine if the world lost Optionplooper. Claire is performing a service for humanity by preserving it for us and reminding the world of that and a million other great words that she has in there.
I mean, I think I also wanted you to speak a little bit about the card game that you're developing, Negocios Infernales, and in particular, how it's not just about gameplay or even creative gameplay, but how the two of you have used it as creative prompts to create new published works, which I've thought is very interesting.
Yeah, in fact, the poem that I read to you was came out of a card draw. It came out of the fact that we just wanted to write some poetry, drew some cards. So, Claire, I don't know if you have cards handy by you that you can sort of like hold up to the camera, but if you don't,
You keep talking and I'll get them.
okay. No, but so like the idea of Negocios Infernales is like, I'm a role player. I've been playing since first edition D&D and before, like the basic set. Like I cracked one of those open 462 years ago. So like I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons and other 5e games for a very long time. Loved them. Claire had not. And so one of the things that we discovered is that role playing, like Dungeons and Dragons style role playing, is extremely complicated and feels a lot like work to her. So I was like, you know what? There's so much in role playing that you could get out of. I am going to make a role playing game that you're going to love. And so what I did is try to do the most basic kind of mechanic that I could think of, but also borrow from games that she'd already loved. So the cards, basically the way they work is you create this wizard character, and then to see if the magic works, you just check your character sheet and the cards that you have on it, and you check if you draw a card, if the suits match. The suits are the borders there. And that's it. If the suits match, story goes your way, magic goes your way, excellent. If the suits don't match, disaster, catastrophe, destruction. So like, I don't know if you can see, but like, you know, that card right there she's holding up says, ruins are ruins for a reason. And it's got all sorts of like spooky little black ink eyeball creatures like peeking out from dark corners. We wanted to make evocative cards that would help with the storytelling as well. One of the games that Claire has ended up loving is Mysterium. Those of you who haven't played Mysterium, think of like Clue by way of like these magical surreal cards that you're using to basically try to figure out, you know, who done it, where they done it, and what was the implement they used to do it. So that's it. It's like we made a game where you're just drawing these wild cards like murder for order, and then you're using that to figure out if your magic powers work, and then telling a story together. What we discovered, however, is that these cards are also great as story prompts. And so we've held many an Infernal Salon at this point. That's what we call them. And an Infernal Salon is basically like, okay, writer, how many cards do you want? And then they pick some cards, we deal them out to them, we give them a little time, and then, you know, everybody regroups and we read what we wrote. And it just turns out to be unfailingly a fabulous time. Like, truly wonderful things have been written in those 20 or 30 minutes that we've given people.
And so our friend Rebecca Houston is the artwork, did the artwork. So we came up with all the sayings, and we came up with the idea of the 7 suits. And then we said we wanted like one color per suit, so black and white with the one color border, and then highlight accents. And Rebecca Houston just delivered and kept delivering. It was very fast, and you know, did the edits that we asked. So she was just particularly wonderful to work with. And as you see, she's a tattoo artist by trade, and you see her lines are really strong, and the like her original artwork, 70 pieces of original artwork, you know, like mind-blowing that this hadn't existed in the world, and how between her art and the suits and our like suite of meanings that we sort of dreamed up for that, there's like a deep sort of mythos or logic that is apparent on a subliminal level, I think. And so they work in that sense like any oracular deck, where we put as much wisdom as we possess, which, you know, collectively is only the sum of our years and the sum of everything we've read and everybody we've known and admired, which in the grand scheme of things is not very much, but there is wisdom there too. And so there is, and we had a world in mind. So there's a certain, I guess, palette, which is a bit macabre and melancholy. You never would guess it from our work, would you? But it tends to ring bells either in the game or in a salon or just between us doing story prompts. It works on a level that I actually never expected. And the gameplay has gotten more and more fun for me, who am still learning about how to play role-playing games and how to think of them as a game time and a play time rather than a get over a learning curve kind of time and get over some anxiety or nervousness about this medium that really wasn't one I wanted to play in. But I am like Carlos and has succeeded in his efforts to create a role-playing game that I like, and more than that, has succeeded in his efforts to introduce me to even more games and board games and role-playing games that I really do like. So he's worked his butt off because it's one of his vocations, games, and I really wanted to be able to share in that part with him. And I'm just so very pleased with this collaboration. We last year during the pandemic, we got kind of self-exiled to my mom's house in Phoenix for 3 months with like one bag of clothing each. And we'd spent a lot of time out on the porch in the early hours of the morning, giving each other cards and like just writing poetry and stories and memoir pieces like off of them. And we knew it worked for us, but not until we started hosting the salons did we see how it worked, not only for writers of great mind and storied like biography, but beginning writers and writers who were stuck during the pandemic and hadn't been able to write in 2 years. And there is a great deal that happens in the 30 minutes of time we give them in those constraints and with the cards and with all the goodwill in the world. We have seen whole stories be written in a half an hour. We've seen poetry. We've seen memoir pieces. Still, it's like, it's almost like excruciatingly painful, like the delight that we take in this. And we're just pleased with it. We're happy. We're looking forward to sharing it with the world.
Are you planning on writing a sort of shadow set of instructions that would include how to use the game for creative endeavors?
Not even shadow. Like it's just going to be in there.
Part of the game.
Yeah,
as like an appendix, you know, for creatives. Basically, there's also probably going to be a way that you can sort of mine the game mechanics itself to do more things like world building, character creation. There's the basic set of like, use these 3 cards to inspire you, 1 or 2 or 3, give yourself a timer. You know, you can host your own infernal salon, because sometimes that kind of writing is more fun with other people and you all share immediately if you're comfortable with it. And there's something like, it feels like a 24-hour theater festival in which there's an urgency and an excitement right in the air and sort of like the surprise at what one is capable of.
Well, I want to just quickly put in here, since we do have an audience question from Jonathan Gladstone Gelman, who's been an extremely devoted attendee to these virtual readings, for which I am personally most grateful. And Jonathan says, so much fun. How does one spell Valwode?
Exactly like that, Jonathan. Well done. Good ear. Yeah, I wanted, it kind of comes from, you know how the word Percival, the name Percival, it means piercing the veil. And the veil sometimes is like between our world and the fairy world, or our world and the underland, the dead world. So Val, that V-A-L, has that kind of veil sound to it. And then Wode is like woods or the woods. So like the veil, the woods in the veil, the fairy woods, that sort of thing. That was the idea behind the name.
Neat.
Yeah, if you study Claire's words and they don't exist yet, they often have gorgeous little etymologies that, you know, they're not the easiest to tease out, because you have to be like, okay, so this half we're going with sound and this half we're going with sort of like an old Anglo-Saxon meaning. But, you know, there is a lot to discover there. So I can't wait in 150 years to see the dissertations that are going to be written about the lexical magic that's going on in St. Death's Daughter.
So Tolkien level philology.
Oh man, I wish I had that. Like, I have a friend who's a linguist and a fantasy writer, James Ang. I love his work. I just like stare at it, you know, and it's high fantasy. It's super fun. It's got great battle scenes, good monsters, but stuff he does with language, just as if it were like breathing. Anyway, I always wanted to be like that, but I don't have enough language or like background. I just look up etymologies in the dictionary and just sort of slam them together.
Starts there, presumably. And I notice, of course, since you brought that up, that both of you are poets. And what role do you think poetry plays in genre writing? Because I know that sometimes it gets brought off to the side, and I get the sense that the two of you are trying to make it a bit more central, I think.
It's a great question. I think what I would say is somebody who I did my MA more with a poetry focus, and then the PhD had more a fiction focus. That the great thing about genre writing is that it is much more infused with poetry than typical, say, literary fiction or the things that are commercial fiction that are more realistic. Poetry infuses sometimes even the technique of writing a sentence. And so there are all sorts of writers writing now who have strong influences of poetry. And so, like, Fran Wilde just came out with a book of poetry, but she writes in a very poetical kind of mode. And I think if you just sort of like look at some of the darker fantasy, it is highly infused with poetical kinds of renderings and conceits and all sorts of ways of just structuring a sentence. I think that is one of the things that attracts me to genre, the fact that there is a more poetical ear for a certain kind of SFF. There's a certain kind of SFF that benefits from that kind of robustness that you find in poetry. I also will say that Claire and I read each other's work aloud all the time to one another and to ourselves. And as soon as you engage in reading something aloud like that, it's, I would argue, always going to become more poetical in the way that theater tends to be more musical, more poetical, just on its sentence constructions over, things that are meant only to be read on the page.
And for me, I didn't study in my master's poetry. I just came to poetry from a love of a lot of like children's books, like Dr. Seuss or Edward Leary, Edward Gorey, the Yongi Bongi Bo, the Dashley Crumb Tinies, the kind of playfulness, and then like the 19th century story poems, and then later like the more like Beowulf, the epic poems. I love poems that tell stories, and I think part of that is like mixed in with my love of like folk music, Leonard Cohen, Joni Mitchell, even older like the Scots English ballads, the murder ballads of the Appalachian, and then Broadway musicals. Every song that's worth its place in the show is a story song. It gives you a character, and it gives you a window into that story. It has to bolster somehow the structure of the plot. And so all of that is to say is that it's like, I think that there is maybe too deep of a schism right at the moment between the poets and the writers. There's many writers who are also poets. They're writing a lot of poetry. There's just not a lot of room for them. And the great, like the one, when I was in my 20s, there was Goblin Fruit, Mythic Delirium, they were very poetry heavy. They had, as many poems as stories. Goblin Fruit was all poetry. So there's not like a dedicated right now, or at least a well-known dedicated poetry magazine. There's Sycorax's Daughters, just started a journal. There's a couple things, but
Deadlands now too.
And Deadlands, yeah, Deadlands is great. But Deadlands is also essay, it's also story.
Right.
But Deadlands does have a concentration in poetry. Uncanny and Strange Horizons have poetry, but they're all just a little divorced from each other. And it's in the past several years, there hasn't been poetry open mics or poetry readings the way, again, like when I was in my 20s, there seemed to be, which tells me, and I've been thinking about this the last couple of weeks, is that, well, if I want it, I should do something about it. And I feel like I have been concentrating a lot on my own work, but it might be time to, if I want it to see it in the world, I should probably start suggesting it and organizing it or hosting it, because I really am feeling more and more strongly every day that I think there's a thirst for it, and that it fulfills something else in a writer's body, to tell stories through poems or to express an emotion in a speculative way, that it just kind of opens a new doorway. And I'd like to see it become more robust and more integrated, I think, into the conversation.
I will point out three things, one of which is I know that there is a poetry collective that's based in your borough, at least in general, even if it's not SF. And then, in fact, there was like a giant like poetry slam on Governor's Island over the summer, because I kind of happened across it while I was there.
Huh.
And then the third thing, which I bet you don't know, Carlos, which was that the former poet laureate of the United States, Robert Pinsky, before he was, in fact, the poet laureate, wrote a computer adventure game in 1986.
Cool.
Which
Pinsky's incredible.
Yes, but Mind Wheel was an amazing game and led me to have a not entirely successful internship at the Echo Press, but that's neither here nor there. I want to remind the audience that they should be coming up with questions. And right now, since I have the opportunity, since you guys aren't ponying up, I'm going to ask my fun, juicy, lurid question that I kind of wanted to ask. It's not that lurid. One of the
Dang
things
it, you're such a tease, Amy.
Yes. One of the things I've noticed that Carlos, you've included as you might, and Claire, you seem to enjoy including in pretty much every story collection that you have and in your novels, and that is polyamory. There's a lot of very, very positive polyamorous relationships. I mean, I will say in Saint Death's Daughter, one of the relationships is not that positive, but that's really less about the institution and more about how perhaps you shouldn't magically enthrall your spouses and steal their memories.
Yeah,
But
probably not.
Yeah, maybe
but
not.
other than that, there is, certainly stuff in there that says there's nothing wrong with polyamory as an institution. So if you'd like to speak on that, because that's of interest
Carlos,
to me.
do you want to start or should I, darling?
I mean, either way, happy to start.
I grew up, and well, my adult growing up. So there's like growing up in a certain kind of nuclear family with certain like religious tenets and all that you shed after a certain time. Sometimes some of us do. And then in my 20s, I just met so many wonderful other kinds of people with other beliefs. And I think that whether or not it's what I would do personally, I call myself philosophically polyamorous, but in practice, I actually don't have enough energy and my organizational skills go elsewhere. What I was mostly single for most of my life, probably because of this. And then when I got into a relationship in my later adulthood with Carlos, I was like, this is a lot. This is like, I already had one job writing and another job voice acting. And now I have another job, which is to pay attention to this darling thing. And that's like enough for me. But it doesn't stop me from like looking at our history of literature and how the bulk of it is this very narrow idea of what love is and what a relationship is. And I feel like the world is having this conversation, and I want to be a part of it and pay homage to my wonderful friends and give my 2 cents for what it's worth. That's basically why I write them in like that.
Yeah, and in my case, it was a little bit different in that to me, it was just like we have very simplistic ideas and kind of like childish ideas about relationships. I think, especially in the United States, where everyone's like, "Ooh, you're married? Does that mean you do it?" It's like this very, very like small, tiny, primitive idea of like how different people can have relationships in the world. And so, I'm teaching Goblin Market in one of my English classes, 2 of them actually, and the idea that we're reading one of the critics who's like, in our postmodern sense, we tend to just focus only on the lurid kind of like reading of that, but that there's a whole tradition that makes that fit in with a much more St. Augustine way of philosophizing, using the body to be more worshipful and more holy toward God. And that's the sort of thing that I think we're missing. So this, my presentation of the Gabby Dads and Fix the Universe, Sal says it's almost like being knighted or something like that. And he himself becomes a Gabby Dad. He becomes prestidigitation at one point in Break the Universe. So it's like, it's clearly not something that's tied to some very small idea of like, ooh, get you're married. I guess, it's sexual or something like that. It's something very different. It's much more about loving people, gathering together to make the world better. To
found family.
Yeah, well, it's found family, and it's also just like building community and community. Like, so like even within the dads, there seem to be some former relationships that are continuing in this new form and stuff like that. So like there are little micro units, and all of that is meant to be like, yeah, it's really complicated. So I will tell you that, people have, sort of like written on Twitter and written to me directly and been like, okay, but what's the scoop? Like, who's actually Gabby's dad? And I'm like, nope.
It's no one's business.
I was curious, and then we actually do have an audience question, which is great. Have you gotten any pushback by putting that web of relationships into a middle grade novel?
Nope. Because I think, again, the way that it's contextualized so far, I think people see it for what it is, where, Sal directly says they're clearly not actually married to each other. Dad is clearly like an honorific, and this is very clearly something other than that. There's a scene in the hospital where he's meeting all the dads, and he's just like, I'm not going to judge. I'm not even going to ask. They'll tell me what I need to know. And like, clearly they're not going to be doing something illegal or whatever. So it's like, shine on, you crazy diamonds. And that's the moment. It's that moment where Gabby becomes closer to Sal and really thinks of him as a friend, because he's able to, without judgment, understand that lots of people can be part of your family.
Okay, we have an audience question from Sean Elliott.
Hi, Sean.
Who says, after such a profound question, and I suspect they mean something that refers more to my wordplay and poetry stuff and not the bit about polyamory, which is, pushing it, but I still wanted to know. One that may be a bit more prosaic. Claire, can you comment on how Darkbreakers connects to Desdemona and the Deep, and potentially Saint Death's daughter, in terms of their shared world chronology or shared characters? Similarly, Carlos, does Thig take place in the same multiverse as many of your other pieces?
So, I've got to figure out there. All right. So, you see the Breaker Queen and the two Paupers chronologically come first. Then if you were to slide the monster that is Desdemona in the Deep into it chronologically, it would come right between the two Paupers and Salice's Laundries. Then Salice's Laundries, Longer Green, and Saussure to the Moon. And then there's potentially something called Fiddle, which is a novel I'm working on that would come after Saussure to the Moon, that I've sort of planted some seeds in Saussure. It's like your little teaser. Like at the end of a Marvel movie, it's like that 5 minutes after the credits. So that's what Saussure to the Moon is meant to do in this book. So there's also, if you read Bone Swans.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
My collection, Bone Swans, there's a couple things happening in that. In How the Milkmaid Struck a Bargain with a Crooked One, if you read it one way, it's a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. If you read it another way, it is the backstory of all the Darkbreakers books. It takes place hundreds and hundreds of years before the events of Darkbreakers, but it sets up the reason the worlds have split into three, why the walls are up. It's the War of the Changelings. It doesn't get into the war. It's just all of the stuff that happens to make it go. So somewhere between How the Milkmaid Struck a Bargain with a Crooked One and The Breaker Queen, there might be another novella or novel called, well, it's sometimes been called Gentry Babes, and sometimes there's been a something called John of the Air. And if you smushed them together and made a War of the Changelings narrative, that might be the thing that belongs there if it ever happens. And some of that work is set up in Salice's Laundries and the first three novellas of Darkbreakers. Like I put all the seeds there just in case. It's shimmering. In Bone Swans, the collection, Life on the Sun takes place in the same world as my novel that Amy mentioned at the beginning called The Twice Drowned Saint, which is in the Sinister Quartet. It's a short novel, 60,000 words. It's in a collection with 3 novellas by 3 other authors in a Sinister Quartet. But The Twice Drowned Saint is in the same desert as this, which probably is in the same world as Darkbreakers, but in a different country, in a different continent, and a different part of the timeline. Different gods, different magic. It may as well not be the same world, but it is. If you go back far enough, there's stuff, Stone Shoes, Oubliette's Egg. Those places and countries that are mentioned in Saint Death's Daughter. Again, but a different part of the timeline. So as we get more and more into it, like Amondale and the Bone Swans of Amondale is mentioned in The Witch and the Almond Tree. So like, in a sense, if you read enough of my work, you'll sort of get this sense of a whole globe that has a really long history and a deep mythology, but it's not always the same mythology. The way in our world, we have many gods and faiths, and at different times of history, there's more or there's less. And so that is kind of the idea, sort of my way of saying, wow, like I could make up lots of worlds and maybe I should, try to do that but in some ways it's like one person can't even invent a whole world, and it's certainly not in one work, so I guess that's what I could tell you how every one of my stories connects, but it's mostly just to keep myself entertained when I'm writing. It's like all these little Easter eggs, basically.
All right, so you got all that, Sean, right? You were hitting most stuff. All right, so here's my answer. No.
Well, but if it's a multiverse, presumably there is a
No.
it's a separate multiverse.
No.
It's a separate multiverse.
No.
Oh Lord, you guys are tough, or at least Carlos is tough.
Look at him, he's a cupcake.
Well, I don't know, but that was really, really that was strong. We're gonna be,
So like, I just want to say, to all the Disney lawyers listening out there, Fig has nothing to do with Sal and Gabby. There is no crossover. There is no characters there. All of these properties are brand new and mine, and so therefore they have nothing to do with any contracts I've previously signed. Sincerely,
oh, so this is a legal thing. All right, so we can draw our interpretations as we may.
No, you can't. You can't. Lawyers,
So you can't legislate the inside of any of our heads. It's really too late now.
Carlos, it's headcanon. You can't control their headcanon.
Exactly. Are you trying? The next thing you know, you're going to be charging onto, what is it? AO3? Is that the fan fiction site?
AO3, AOC3. We were just talking
Yes.
about that today. Apparently, people are now in legitimate publishing, like Tor.com, are releasing AO3 hashtags for books they're about to publish, which I think is so great. But I need to ask all my fanfic friends, like, can you read my book and tell me what my hashtags are so that I can start talking like that?
Oh Lordy. We're going to be wrapping up within the next 5 to 10 minutes. So if anybody else has questions, please feel free to share them. That would be awesome. I will also just sort of want to maybe talk a little about, since you brought it up, Claire, the influence of fairy tales on your work. I mean, I'm also thinking The Witch of the Almond Tree is like a quote unquote sequel to The Juniper Tree, which I never even really thought was possible, and is one of the most fairy tales are super dark, but I feel like that's one of the darkest ones that there is. And you also somehow seem to come up with a sort of happy, sexy sequel to something that grotesque. I mean,
Well, and so The Witch and the Almond Tree, in the Bone Swans of Almondale, the fairy tale of the Juniper Tree is at the center of that, and then later in the timeline, The Witch and the Almond Tree comes along, but that Almondale is the same Almondale. It's just at a different part of its timeline. And then in Saint Death's Daughter, there's a god named Kaiwit, the captured god, and his story is the story of the Juniper Tree. Like, it does come up again and again. It's so that's like an undergirding of almost a fairy tale turned religion in my chest, because it's there's like four stories that I think keep coming up in my writing, that I've been thinking about this lately, because it's like I didn't know until I started paying attention. Of like, it's The Traveling Companion by Hans Christian Andersen, it's the Juniper Tree in Grimm's fairy tales, it's Snow White and Rose Red in the Grimm's fairy tales, because I love the two sisters who never don't love each other. Like, they go on an adventure, there's wacky things happening, there's animal transformation, there's stolen gold, but they are always like two sisters who love each other, a la Goblin Market. And then of course there's the Pied Piper. So like, I will say that I'm profoundly aware of these things. Sometimes I try to escape them, and then they like come up under me again. So but yeah, I did like writing The Witch and the Almond Tree. It's sort of like, after the facts are established and there's long-term consequences to murder, there's like generational hauntings, and what do you do when you're a witch and your job is to take care of this stuff? That's kind of an urban fantasy trope, is to clean up other people's messes, and I feel like that falls under urban fantasy in a secondary world fantasy setting.
other literary inspirations that you have, Carlos, and then we will probably wrap up.
Yeah. So to me, one of the things that I really like to do is take all the woo-woo that's in science and apply it as if it were fairy tales. Because here's the thing. It's like, theoretical physics is so theoretical right now that many of its leading ideas are untestable. Like, literally, like, we literally cannot construct an experiment to test the theories that combine string theory, M theory, the brains, BRANE, that are clashing against each other and starting universes. Really, really, really interesting fictions that people are theorizing. And I mean, they have reasons to hypothesize about it, but it's untestable. And if it's untestable, is it science? There's a debate in the community, if this constitutes science with it being sort of untestable. But to me, it couldn't get any better from a fiction perspective in terms of like, why is it that we are having these ideas right now? There are mathematical reasons for sure. There are physical reasons for sure. But there are also dreamy reasons, and there are reasons why we cling to ideas like many worlds theories and other things like that, because they not only speak to a way of describing a possible way in which nature writ large works, speaks to the way in which we see ourselves right now and the way that we phenomenologically construct ourselves. So of course, like science is the study of the ontological world, of the world outside of ourselves, and it's trying to objectively get a grasp of that. But science also has its phenomenological perspective because it's the only game in town. There is no other kind of reality except the one that you are constructing in your head right now and shoving into your brain, like whatever inputs you have, that's the world that you're rendering right now. So even ontology is phenomenological when you think of it that way. And that's what fiction can do. It can sort of like reveal the phenomenological aspects of the outside world that science tries to study, but phenomenology is always in the way.
Just wanted to remind you, Carlos, to mention our benefit tomorrow.
Yes, indeed. That's what I was going to come to.
Okay.
Talk about the Twitch
Sorry.
stream.
All right. So enough of that babble. Let's talk
Well,
about
it's not babble,
Well,
Carlos.
good.
As somebody who has a unused master's in cognitive neuropsychology, I will say it's not so much that you are shoving something into your brain, but your brain is actually constructing your reality, and your perception of reality is whatever your brain makes, and really may not have that much relationship to reality. Who knows? And let me just say, before you mention the Twitch stream, I love the fact that your poem mentioned the word qualia so many times, because that's like high level philosophy of language stuff that brings me back 25 years. So that was kind of neat. Anyway, talk about the Twitch stream and your benefit. Please.
Me, you, Claire?
Yes. What are you?
I think you're more locked in than I am. I'm there as the co-host.
Well, luckily Jim Freund is faster than all of us. So on the screen right now, you'll see twitch.tv/Arvon Eleron, ARVAN ELERON. On that Twitch stream tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern time, you will see myself and just a marvelous host of different writers. Like, I mentioned, it's going to be Martha Wells. It's going to be Zigzag Claiborne. It's going to be Kwame Mbalia. It's going to be Fran Wild. Help me out, Claire.
I'm looking for our little thing right now. So keep talking, and then I'll give you the full list.
We have a marvelous array of just some luminaries of science fiction and fantasy who are going to come together and play our game with us. So this is going to be a chance for Martha Wells to draw some cards and write a story on the spot, and all these other people to do this as well. So Claire, go ahead.
So it's Patrick Rothfuss runs this World Builders fundraiser, and he seems to work 24/7, and we're giving him a 2-hour break tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening to, eat something or maybe take a nap. That's basically our role, is to take his audience for a couple hours
and raise some money.
Raise some money while he gets eat some broth or whatever. So it's Patrick Rothfuss's World Builders charity, and it's going to be Carlos and myself co-hosting. But here is our guest list. This is just mind-blowing. So Martha Wells, Will Alexander, who's a National Book Award winner, Fran Wild, multiple award winner, Sarwat Chadha, who is another Rick Riordan Presents author, Kat Rambo, storied science fiction writer, Zigzag Claiborne, just one of the fine and wild voices of our time, Kwame Mbalia, another Rick Riordan Presents author, and Coretta Scott King award winner, Cerise Rennie Murphy, who runs the Virtuous Con, and Erin Amendola, who is Patrick Rothfuss's outreach publicity assistant. the coordinator. Yeah.
And also a theater person too.
Oh yeah, he's so great. Like you could tell that he's been in 24-hour theater festivals, he's done improv, and he's a writer. So you're like, well, have we got a game for you? So it's not, they're not playing Negocios and Finales, they're playing the salon game with us. So that's what, so they'll be writing, we'll give them a half hour to write, we'll give them cards and a half hour to write, and then they'll read brand new things like right off the bat for us.
Neat. This has been great. And so everybody should come to the salon. I mean, because of course you all have Twitch installed either on your computer or your phone, or if not, you can watch it on your laptop if you need to. I personally also have it on my Apple TV, which is kind of fun for me.
Right. But it's an app, but it's also on the website. So
yes. So anybody can join. But you know, if you don't have Twitch, how else can you watch an endless stream of episodes of Iron Chef? Very important. Anyway, I want to thank both of you for reading and just sharing in your creative process. And I'm glad everybody seems happy. You've made people happy, which I think is something the two of you have been really good at. I want to remind everybody that this wonderful outpouring is not free. The software actually, in fact, does cost money. So any donations that you would choose to give to the Hour of the Wolf PayPal account or Jim's Patreon, that it would be gratefully accepted so that we can keep this series going. We will keep all of you posted about what we who we intend to have for January and the months beyond, and also what we will do in terms of finding a new location, which I hope we will be able to do in a timely manner because, you know, let's face it, I love the people, and you know, thankfully some of the readings have been able to come back in person, and I would love this one, which is my home, to be in person once again if we're all feeling safe and are triply vaxxed. So get your boosters, stay healthy, and yeah, exactly. I got mine on was it 2 weeks ago? Yeah, get your boosters. and let's all join up again. And thanks to you, C.S.E. Cooney and Carlos Hernandez, for one of your usual wonderful performances. And thanks to all of you out there, both live and recorded. And of course, thanks to Jim Freund, who produces this series. And
thank you, Amy.
Yes, thank you, Amy Goldschlager.
Well, but also we have to thank Barbara, who is audience wrangling and is just provides support for the series in a variety of ways. And you guys are all awesome. And I look forward to, quote unquote, seeing you all next month. Although I'll probably be behind the scenes next time. Although who knows?
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Carlos. Mwah.